Hello everybody, so my name is Lina Rylander and I'm here to present my paper that I have written together with my supervisor Magnus Eneberg. So I will start with a short introduction of my research project and the background, and then shortly, of course, go through the purpose and aim of the paper and also the methods. But I will try to spend the most time on the result and discussion and also end with some conclusions. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the future of transportation. So, as you all know, we're standing in front of a social, sustainable crisis where we need to try to change our way of doing things. And that also applies in the transportation industry. So we try to make a shift in the transportation industry to become more sustainable. And one innovation that are considered one solution to perform a more sustainable transportation is self-driving vehicles. So here is a picture of how Scania picture a self-driving vehicle. And of course, introducing self-driving vehicles in the transportation industry will cause some disturbance. And one obvious change is that the driver no longer is present. So then we come into the research context that I'm looking into. So we are looking into the service market or the aftermarket, which means the system that take care of maintenance and repair. Because we know that the driver is crucial for the service market. So for example, the driver is the one that detects the fault in the vehicle. For example, seeing the alarm in the dashboard or sensing vibrations in the vehicle. But the driver is also responsible for making decisions and taking proper actions. So the driver is involved in a lot of communication and interactions in their work when something happens with the vehicle. So a little bit about the research context. So the approach that we are using is a systemic approach. So we have defined the service market system as a complex socio-technical system, which means that we are considering all types of actors in the system, both humans but also technical actors and artifacts. And what we are interested in is not only the actors in the system, but also how they interact and the relationships with each other. So this research project builds on our exploration and our learnings during this project. And I also want to highlight this quote because I think it's so good, and sometimes it feels like he's talking to me. So there's so much talk about the system and so little understanding. And what I want to do is try to understand the system. So the first step I took in my research was to interview actors in the system and try to find out who and whom are they interacting with and what happens in those interactions. So I developed a gigamap, and here you can see that there are two large organizations that are part of this system. So we have the haulage company and the service centers. But we also have a lot of other types of actors. And on top of that, we also have regulations and laws, which make this system quite complex. So during my research, a curiosity started to grow in me. Like, how can we use design methods to handle complex systems? And how can we use design methods in order to understand how we can change the system? Because when the vehicles are becoming driverless, we need to change the system. We need to redesign it. We need to understand which reconsiderations that we need to make. So based on my curiosity, I had a long discussion with my supervisors, or many long discussions. And for this paper, we have summarized some of them. So the purpose and aim with this presentation is the purpose and aim with our paper is to increase our understanding of how designers perceive the past and future development in the discipline, and also explore the designer's role in working with system transformation and transition. So just shortly about how we have done this research study. So, as I said, we started with interviewing actors in the system, and we have also done observations. So we have been riding in the car or in the truck together with drivers to observe their daily working routines. And on top of that, we have also had workshops with Scania experts that could help us to both develop scenarios, but also imagine a possible future where we have self-driving vehicles. And in the end, we developed a prototype that we used for design intervention together with the possible future users. But then we also have the need of understanding the designer's role in this. So we interviewed 6 designers, 4 of them working as consultants in different design organizations, and also 2 Scania designers at Scania. So to learn a little bit more about the designer's perspective on the future development. So now I will go in and talk a little bit about the result and discussion. So I want to start with this picture that summarizes our findings in the study. So what we could see in our research, and also what we have learned doing this research project, is that there is a relationship between involvement and complexity. So increased complexity of the artifact also leads to increased involvement in the design practice. But however, this also changes the designer's role, of course. So in our paper, we are using the descriptions of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary to explain this. So we are using the definitions by Choi and Pak. However, I believe that there are many other ways to describe this as well, but this is our way of trying to categorize and also to explain our learnings. So I will start a little bit with interdisciplinary. So interdisciplinary design work is, for example, designers are working only with one discipline. So this has relationships with goods dominant logic. So for example, the designers are adding value at the end of the product development process. And this can also be called a relieving service, such as the client organizations are outsourcing the aesthetic aspect of the product to designers. And I will give an example from Scania. So at Scania, designing the truck is of course a very important task at Scania. However, the designers working with that are not involving other people in their work. They're only working with designers. They're rarely talking to other engineers or other people in the organization. But we have started to see a shift. In other types of other departments at Scania, designers are working more closely to other disciplines, but also closer to the end user. And that leads us to multidisciplinary. So multidisciplinary design work considers involving several disciplines and trying to understand their perspective. So this can, for example, be done by performing exploratory workshops. But the thing here is to trying to understand their perspectives, not involving them in the design work. So the people that are participating in the workshops are staying within their own discipline. So here's an example of one of the respondents that talked about what I mentioned before, that it's a shift at Scania. So the respondent said, the big change I experienced, what I mentioned with UX, is how UX has grown so that all the micro interactions have become a larger part of our interaction with the users than before. So they are self-aware that they have increased their interactions with the users. And they also see a very positive thing with involving users this way. So one of them said, secondly, you minimize risk and solve problems to a greater extent. And solutions can be improved by becoming more bulletproof and more flavorful. But what happens when we come into interdisciplinary design work? So interdisciplinary design work can be exemplified by involving respondents or participants in the creative process, in, for example, co-creation workshops. And this can be described as an enabling service. And in the context of service-dominant logic, that means also shared learning activities. So here the designer becomes a facilitator, teacher, and coach, educating others in the design work. And one of the respondents said that they, the clients, are much more involved in the design process these days than they were 5 to 10 years ago, when we saw ourselves as experts. And so they both have a very positive view of this, but the designers also feel that this type of work can be quite difficult. So one of them said, I'm there as a coach, and say that now you should hold interviews, and then you should do this. And it is hard, I think. It is challenging. However, they also think that it can be difficult to involve people in design that do not have a design education, such as it cannot be done by someone who does not have any kind of experience, or background, or education, or understanding, or has practiced any kind of design. So they see both positive things with this, but also they see some challenges. But what happens then when we go into transdisciplinary design work? So we have seen a need for transdisciplinary design work when we are targeting complex problems. So one description of transdisciplinary design work can be, for example, working beyond existing boundaries. So we try to remove the boundaries of, for example, the role of the designer. So when you go into the transdisciplinary work, you try to sort of let go of the boundaries of your discipline. And we have seen that this could be very useful for working with the transformations and transitions. And I also want to mention that in the design practice, we have a lot of methods and tools that support transformation and transitions, such as pattern finding is very important for transformation. That is something that we are very good at in the design practice. However, we have also seen a need for a systemic perspective, and we have seen a need for involving design thinking and system thinking. And this has, of course, a lot of challenges, because they have very different approaches. And for example, in system thinking, the designer is a stakeholder, but in design thinking, the designers try to understand stakeholders. So here we can see conflict between conflict in the designer's role. And also what we have identified is that there is a need for new tools and methods that can help us to handle complexity and ambiguity, such as designing a future for self-driving vehicles. Within methods and tools that can help us to understand both how can the future look like, but also how can we reach that future. And here I also want to highlight the sustainability perspective. That we need to have a sustainable mindset here. When we are transforming huge systems, we need to do it in a sustainable way. So I will just give some examples of how the respondents talked about this. Where we are not, we as designers, is in policy making, politics. This is still a lot of unexplored land. And here we have a potential to see how system thinking and design thinking can support each other and how we can develop the approach, because there are so many new areas where we can explore this. And also one of the respondents highlighted the need for system thinking. So the respondent said, I think it's very important to include other actors outside the organization. It can be other companies or public organizations. If you just stare blindly at user needs, you can create quite unsustainable solutions. So this is where system thinking comes in more and more. So the designers has also started to identify the need of using system thinking in their work. So I want to end with giving you some of my main conclusions of the paper. So first of all, we have seen the need for increased level of involvement when we are working with increased level of complexity. And we also see a possibility to use design in many other areas where we are not applying design today, such as in policy making. But also here I want to highlight sustainability and sustainable development. So we have seen a need for system thinking and integrated methods, but what happens when designers become stakeholders? So in system thinking or in systemic design, designers are agents themselves. They are, you can see that in systemic design, for example, the designers are part of the system themselves. So how can you as a designer work with transforming a system when yourself are in the system as an agent? So I want to end this presentation by asking 2 questions and not give any answers maybe. So who is a designer and what is design when design moves towards system thinking? So I think here we have a lot of new possibility of good research to do. So what role can designers take and what role can design take when we are working with transforming complex socio-technical systems? So with that, I would like to say thank you and open up for questions.